one of the things that I think is really important about the most recent analysis about the gender pay gap for physicians is really reflecting on not only what my own personal experience is, but really looking at women in general. Now, historically, it has been a male-dominated field up until recently, where we are seeing that women are outpacing men in terms of entering the field. There was a recent analysis of looking at the number of female physicians currently in the workplace between 2022 and 2025, representing almost 40% of the physician workplace. Now, you may say, well, men are still out dominating in regards to the numbers, and therefore maybe that's why they're demanding a higher salary, is because they've been there longer. They're still the majority stakeholders. However, what this number represents is 1.5 times the number of women that were practicing only 20 years ago. There has been a 97% growth in women entering into the field. However, if these types of pay gaps are continuing to exist, we may see that this is not a persistent trend in the near future. So when I look at this, I would say to you that as a woman, it is something that hits near and dear to home because of the fact that very frequently we're looking at men and women in the workplace through two different lenses, not just based on what is the job that they are doing in the workplace, but what are all the jobs that they're doing outside of the workplace? And really, when we dig into this data, we're finding that the representation of this data is reflecting just that. We see that women are more likely to be underpaid compared to men. First, potentially because of the specialties being selected. One would first ask the question, why are we seeing these gender differences in selection? Is there a different motivation for women to choose lower paying jobs over men, despite doing the same work for 4 years of college and 4 years of medical school? We somehow become complacent and say, hey, we're just not worth that much in the workplace. Probably not. I'm sure that there are other factors that are at play, whether it's our own internal motivation or perhaps family factors, or is it that it's a harder job for a woman to be able to enter into the training programs versus their male counterparts? That's something that this study does not explore and something that may perhaps need further exploration as we continue to move forward. However, let's just pretend we've gotten through that period. And now we've grown up, we're full-fledged attendings. Where we're selecting to practice actually differs significantly between men and women. We're seeing that women are more likely to be represented in locations that are known to be lower paying. Again, is this a purposeful choice that we're choosing to be undervalued compared to our male counterparts? Well, there also seems to be a trend that in these locations that may be lower paying, that they also tend to be offering better accommodations for parenting, whether it is parenting leave, or perhaps maybe it has a better workplace environment that is supportive of women being mothers. So, are we seeing that the choice to be a mom is leading to a perpetual discrepancy in pay? Or is it that we are potentially seeing that women are moving forward and going, I need to have a different type of job description. Maybe I need a lower FTE. Well, one of the things that is interesting about this analysis is that they actually controlled for this. They looked to see whether or not the FTE doesn't make a difference. And what did they find? No, it didn't. There still was a persistent pay gap despite controlling for FTE. Now, with that stated, I always like to be fair and balanced. And one of the things that I would say that this was not controlled for is although there may have been a regulation of, yes, we looked at the FTE and we adjusted to make sure that we're looking at apples to apples based on FTE. What may not be appreciated is the fact that there may be a different job description related to that FTE. And we recognize that if someone is a 1.0 FTE, it is not a 40-hour work week. Very frequently, we see 60, 70, 80 hours. I know I felt culprit to that type of mentality, and I myself have just readjusted my FTE to give myself a better work-life balance. Now, with that, what came with that? It came a new job expectation and new roles and responsibilities. And so we may be seeing that women are selecting better self-care and the ability to have that better work-life balance compared to potentially our male counterparts. However, one of the things that we do find is that despite the fact that we're working in different locations, we're entering potentially different areas of medicine, we're finding that when you are comparing apples to apples, we're in the same specialty, we still are not having apples to apples in salary. We're finding that there is a significant gap that only continues to increase over time. We also are finding that there's differences in things like a recruitment bonus or a relocation bonus. Now, although women tend to have a little bit of a higher relocation bonus by about almost 2000, that recruitment bonus is more than 7 grand for the male counterpart versus the female. So despite us getting that competitive edge for extra 2K, we're still losing out by 5K when we're comparing it to the 7,000 that our male counterparts are getting in the recruitment. Now, one may say, well, what's a few $1,000s here or there? Well, you want to know what it totals to? Over a 30-year career, it is estimated to be worth about a $3.3 million difference. For me, that is not small chump change. It is not a matter of counting dollars and cents. It is a matter of a difference between not only what is my salary today, but what is my retirement tomorrow? If I am not getting the same pay wages, then how are we going to account for either one, more closely approximating work for work, or potentially gaining more data to better understand what are the differences so that we can actually create action around making movement forward to allow for us to just have all of the information available so we can better understand, is it purely based on gender, or are there other variables that have a worth that just isn't represented by a salary? When looking at what may be factors driving the differences between the compensation and whether or not they're related to the actual location, and that there's an inherent bias of you show up, you're a man or you're a woman, really tends to still be revealed. What we're finding is that almost everywhere in the United States, when we look at a US map, women are still being undervalued. We find that that gap may be anywhere from 7 to almost 40% difference in terms of salary. We do recognize that there may be differences in regards to where we choose to work, not just the location, such as state, but whether we're working for ourselves, or we see men almost 2 times more likely to be represented as self-employed in the workplace versus we're going in a large specialty private practice versus an academic center or nonprofit. We see that women are tending to be more overrepresented in these lower paying locations. So it's still yet to be seen whether or not, if I were to look at these individual locations, are we seeing that the discrepancy between men and women are as large as when we're looking at things in total? I think that we really need to better understand whether or not these factors are at play. And if they are, then we really are talking about a gender bias that needs to be addressed today. When looking at the differences between non-salary compensation that individuals may be getting, there's absolutely zero reason that a gender should make a difference in terms of what we're getting. If I were to say to you that I'm working a different amount of work or I had different roles or responsibilities, then I can potentially understand why I may have a different salary than someone else. However, if I'm showing up and doing the same work and you're hiring me for the same responsibilities, that recruitment bonus, that relocation bonus, and definitely those work RVUs should be added apples to apples. However, that's not what we're seeing. And very frequently, we're seeing that the work RVU compensation for men over women is really different, almost by $10+ per work RVU. That means for every time I'm doing any type of activity, let's just call it I'm seeing a new outpatient, and that is a total work RVU of 3 RVUs, that I may be seeing a $30 difference. You add that up over the course of a day, you're talking about hundreds to thousands of dollars difference in doing the same work. And so this would be a major call to action of better understanding why there would be a discrepancy between things where we clearly have the same work that we're doing. There shouldn't be anything related to our gender that would be making a rationale for there to excuse the difference in payment.